And like Sarah, I love doing the wildlife cruises because you just, even though you might have a particular focus, you just see such a wealth of other wildlife. And as Sarah said, I've been with Naturetrek now for a while, doing both the poles in Antarctica and Arctica and lots of fabulous places in between. But very much before COVID hit, back in September 2019, I had the fabulous privilege and opportunity to take a wonderful group of nature trekkers to Canada, to the West Coast, on the Spirit Bears, Grizzlies and Humpbacks trip. And that's what I'm going to explore with you this evening, really. And hopefully looking for the Spirit Bear, which is this kind of white version of the black bear. So, as I say, we traveled kind of all the way across Canada. We started off down here near Vancouver, and we went in a propeller plane all the way along the west coast to a place called Bella Bella. And just that journey in its own right was wonderful. It was a small little plane. You can sort of feel every little movement of the plane, but actually looking out, you just get to see and get to really appreciate the kind of landscape. And what we did was we spent around 10 days or so on this on a boat, which I'll show in a moment, and we were going all the way around the Great Bear Rainforest, which is around about the size of Ireland. Obviously, we were just sort of touching into just parts of that, but very much kind of going in amongst all these different islands, and then sometimes creeping out to the open sea a little bit. And we went all the way up north to Kitimat, which is up here, not that far really, towards Alaska in the background, and then we flew back home after that. And this was the boat that we were on. It was the Island Roamer, and it was a little bit like the sort of the Doctor's TARDIS, really, where from the outside it doesn't look too big as a clipper boat, but actually on the inside there's plenty of space for us to socialize, rooms, kind of small bunk beds to sleep in, or slightly more open set rooms for couples, and then of course plenty of space actually on the deck. And we went very much out and about looking at this wonderful wilderness rainforest on Zodiac boats. We had a couple of these which trailed along behind the boat, and we very much used it as a kind of hide as well. So this is when we were out sort of watching whales and gulls, porpoises and orcas and all sorts of things like that. And as I say, the wonderful thing about doing these types of cruises really is just the fact that there's a whole wealth of wildlife, both what's in the water, what's going overhead, and what's in the surrounding landscape as well. And the wonderful thing about being on this boat was we were able to be quite durable in terms of doing different things. And here's us actually going towards and experiencing a wonderful waterfall that was coming down from one of the cliffs, the limestone cliffs that was in the area that we were there. And obviously being in a rainforest, you do get the rain. And certainly, despite the fact that they'd had quite a few weeks of dry weather, during the period that we were there, certainly the first days or so was quite wet. So here's some of the group just going out in the waterproofs really. But we had some brilliant guides with us. And I think that what is always important, and I'm the same here when I take people out in the Forest of Dean or wherever I go taking Naturetrek out, is that you're wanting to sort of almost see the animals and leave the animals without having changed their behavior. And the great thing about going on these Zodiac boats with the crew that we had was that there's great knowledge and great experience of the distances you can approach animals with, the way in which you can come at them and still see them, but without disturbing them. And that's the really crucial thing. And so each day we were going out in different locations. And this, for example, was in the first couple of days, surrounded by all these conifer trees. And at this point in time, in kind of mid-September, you've got all different species of salmon, which are basically coming into spawn and then dying. And all that protein, all that fat food is there on the beaches. And so you get lots of gulls. And if you're lucky, you also get the bears as well. And in the first couple of days, we weren't seeing bears to start with, but we were certainly seeing lots of signs of them and lots of signs of their food. So here we also got the chance to go on land on a number of different days. And we were actually seeing the live salmon fish in the river here. And what I think was great about this was getting a really nice understanding of the ecosystem, of the habitats, and getting a real feel of, you know, the salmon's environment, the bear's environment, and of course, a lot of the birds and other wildlife that were living there as well. And I must add that during the course of this holiday, there was also time out in places as well. We were able to go to like a little sort of rustic kind of forest kind of spa that was kind of just on the edge of the woodland on the rocks. And we were able to go and do a little bit of canoeing, either by ourselves for a little bit of sort of mindful relaxation just around these lovely calm waters, or for those that maybe weren't so confident or weren't so used to using the oars, then some of the crew were able to join us as well and just experience the sounds and the calm water and get away from the kind of the bigger boat during that period. And this is some of the fabulous scenery that we were seeing throughout the journey, really. This was on the first couple of days when we still had quite low cloud. And these are Bonaparte's gulls, which are kind of trickling down through the valley, again, on the lookout for different food. It's just so atmospheric, really, really lovely. Just us out there with no one else around, and the wonderful sights and sounds, and just experiencing the kind of the weather in this temperate rainforest in British Columbia. And sometimes seeing some familiar birds. This is actually a mew gull or common gull, but I think it's a slightly different subspecies than what we get actually in the UK. And the water below this mew gull was beautifully clear. You could see sea urchins, you could see the rocks and the seaweeds below. It was just utterly beautiful, clear weather. And here's another lovely scenic view, looking up towards the hills, the water running down the limestone creeks up there, the coniferous trees, and just the atmosphere and the sound and the smell as well of all the fish that had obviously been washed up on the shore. And here's another view of just some fantastic kind of lichens and mosses, and there was all sorts of wonderful fungi. I even got to see some bird's nest fungi, which I've always wanted to see. And when we were on land, there was this lovely log, and suddenly these little bird nest fungi with the little, what looked like the eggs, which are kind of the spore capsules, which was really wild and wonderful. And even in the rain, there are still lots of birds to see. For example, here we've got a bald eagle looking a little bit bedraggled. And in the first couple of days, we did see a sea otter, we saw redneck grebes, we saw sort of different kind of migratory water birds all around, actually. And of course, the bald eagles are very much being attracted to the fish and the food that's around at this time of the year. And I was very pleased about seeing these, actually. These are wild Canada geese. And of course, in Britain, we get used to seeing the kind of feral populations of them. But these were some wild Canada geese flying through the valley. And you can see they actually look a lot duskier, a lot darker. And I love this picture here of the atmosphere as these geese kind of came out of the mist that was actually surrounding the landscape on this particular day. But of course, what's important is having that opportunity to see the wildlife, and in particular, see the bears. And here we are on the Zodiac boats, being very carefully pushed. At this point, the engines were off, and the guides were very carefully just pushing us into position. You can see the gulls are here on the shoreline. And sure enough, finally, after a couple of days or so, we got our first sightings of our grizzly bears, or our brown bears. So these are the same sort of species that you would see across Europe. And here we've got mum with her cubs that are about 18 months old here. And you can see all the gulls. Most of these are kind of glaucous wing gulls, just hanging around, really looking for those kind of tidbits of food. And the young bears here were very much tumbling along with mum as they were looking for different fish. And this is exactly what they were doing here. I think in the next picture, we can see that mum's actually got a salmon here, and the young cubs were coming over to have a feed with her. And you can see that in the Zodiac boats, we were very level with these bears. It was great for photography because we weren't looking down on them. We were looking sort of level with them. And as I say, these bears very much stayed, keeping their very natural behavior. And when we left these bears, we just were able to be sort of pulled backwards. That the guys were kind of in the water in their waders, basically, and very much got us further away from the bears before the engines were started. So the first couple of days were certainly quite wet, and we had a fabulous chef on board the boat. So whenever we got back onto the boat and our clothes were put down in the engine room to dry off, we just had some just really good kind of home cooked type food, but it was delicious. It was colorful, and the chef was really good at providing food for all sorts of different diets and for different kind of food habits, really. And yeah, it was just so tasty. It was great. And everyone kind of mucked in with kind of helping to sort of, dry up afterwards and talk to the chef and make him feel involved as well. It was really, really fabulous. And obviously welcome when you were coming back on board from after being out watching the bears. So again, just, all the time being surrounded by this amazing landscape. You can just see a few salmon here that have been washed up on the shore. But yeah, just beautiful kind of landscape all the way around. And the wonderful thing, of course, is that the water in many places is actually quite deep. The waters are very calm because we're well away from the open ocean in many of these particular parts of the Great Bear Rainforest. And on this particular morning, we woke up, we'd seen a couple of kind of coastal wolves actually just in the bay that we'd been overnighting in. And as we were coming out to carry along our journey, we suddenly heard and saw these fantastic spouts of two fin whales that were basically just guiding the way along the coastline. And you can just see the fabulous mist of the breath there of this particular fin whale. And you just never quite know. It feels quite surreal that you're not out. Usually when I've seen fin whales, I've been out on the sea, and actually to see them in these wonderful kind of almost fjord-like habitats was really rather wonderful. And actually, in a lot of these more shallow, confined areas, it was often a good place for seeing perhaps much smaller, younger humpback whales. And again, these animals choosing to be near us as opposed to us kind of chasing after them or us getting close to them. So this particular humpback whale here, again, choosing to be sort of close by, giving us these amazing views of its blowhole, before then actually giving us that wonderful ultimate shot of the humpback whale then diving underwater. And the waters here in September are very rich. There's lots of food under the sea, under the water. And actually what you're finding in some of these kind of quieter watery areas are, as I say, single or maybe a few younger whales. And we saw one or two of them kind of practicing doing bubble netting. So I'll show you a photograph in a minute of a much bigger group of humpback whales doing this, but we saw one or two kind of younger, smaller animals almost practicing this by themselves. I remember in one particular kind of almost the equivalent of a loch, suddenly seeing this youngish kind of humpback whale going underwater and creating these bubbles and then coming up with its mouth gulping open and no doubt getting some food, I'm sure. But it was really interesting kind of seeing this behavior on a kind of small scale before we saw it much bigger later on. And I think one of the real treats we had every day was you never, as anything when you do all these cruises, you never know quite what you're going to see. And on a number of days, we saw dulls, porpoises. These are not dulls, porpoises. These are orcas or killer whales. But dulls, porpoises are these super speedy porpoises that are black and white, really kind of zooming around. But actually, on the days when there's none of those around, it often means there might well be a predator like the orca, because orcas will eat dulls, porpoises, for example. And at the start of the cruise and towards the end, we encountered, I think, probably the same pod of orcas. But again, the animals very relaxed, coming past the boat. Just, I think on the first time we saw them, they were very much in kind of transporting mode. They were very much going from A to B. But when we saw them the last time, they were very much kind of feeding. So they were disappearing underwater for quite a while, then coming back up again, and often coming quite close to the boat. And on this animal, actually, you can see the sort of slightly yellow stained white skin, and that's diatoms, these microscopic organisms that grow in the water, grow on the mud, and actually are really important for capturing kind of carbon and photosynthesizing and putting oxygen back into the water. And often they'll grow on the skin of the humpbacks and on the orcas. And you see this particularly actually when you're in the southern hemisphere in places such as Antarctica more. But look at that big tall dorsal fin of the male orca there just on the right. And here he is actually sort of just coming past the boat. It looks like he's almost coming towards the boat. He's not. He was actually just sort of swimming past. And we just got this wonderful photograph of him as he was swimming past. I mean, just incredible. We spent probably about an hour with these animals. And as I say, they were very relaxed. They were choosing to be around us. And wow, what a way to finish the cruise. It was really quite remarkable. Other mammals that we saw included the Steller sea lions. This was more towards the north along the coast areas. And here we were at this kind of sea lion rookery, and many of them in the water as well, actually, all around the boat, which was really fun to see. And on this particular occasion, just before we kind of got finally to some of the rest of the bears, which I'll talk about in a moment, gulls are really important, actually, particularly when you're wanting to watch the whales. This was a Thayer's gull, but we also had lots of glaucous winged gulls, which were also a very big kind of herring gull sized bird, but with much more grey or whiter wings. And when the gulls suddenly become restless and they start flying above the water, calling, you know that there's going to be an event with the whales. And on many occasions, on one particular day, we saw this. We saw some wonderful bubble netting, where I just mentioned it a little bit with the smaller individuals, but on this particular day, there were big adult humpback whales feeding cooperatively, diving down underwater, forming this, what we call this bubble net, which is kind of corralling and scaring the fish into one area. And then the humpbacks all come up at the same time with their mouths open and then gulping in all the water and the krill and the fish or whatever might be there, and allowing that water to filter out, and then obviously swallowing down all that food. And meanwhile, all of those glaucous winged gulls and those Thayer's gulls flying around, picking out some of those bits of food that might have escaped. It really is an incredible spectacle. And up to this point, I'd seen it, you know, on Dave Attenborough films. I'd seen it on, I think, Trials of Life back when I was little as well. But to see it for real was really, really remarkable. And we kept seeing it throughout the day. And even at one point, having the animals come up very close to the boat, actually, because you see them go under, you watch them go under, you know they're going to do it. But you can never always be quite sure until the gulls start crying exactly where the animals are going to cut. But really, really amazing to see, and memorable as well. And then finally, as we were coming towards the end of our tour, we were going back inland around these wonderful little islands, seeing this incredible kind of scenery. And on the last day before we headed back to Kitimat, we spent a day, pretty much 6 or 7 hours, by a wonderful river on Gribble Island, where we wanted to be looking for the spirit bear, these white bears, which are black bears. And we were very safe in this hide here. We'd taken our kind of lunches with us and things like that. And if you look in the middle in the background there, you'll see that there's actually a mum black bear here with her 2 cubs, and I'll show you some closer photographs of them in a moment. But while we were there watching this river all day long with the sound of the running water, we saw some other great things as well. We had at least a couple of American dippers that were feeding all around us and coming quite close. There were Steller's jays, which were coming down to the salmon eggs. If you look just here where my cursor is, you might be able to just see little, almost look like frog spawn, but these were the eggs of fish of the salmon, and the Steller's jays were coming down to feed on those. And then also things like woodpeckers. Here's a hairy woodpecker on a dead tree here. But of course, what we were coming to see were the bears. And throughout that 6 or 7 hour period, we saw lots and lots of different bears kind of coming and going, suddenly just appearing out of the woodland, coming into the water, finding a dead fish or perhaps one that was semi-alive. And these fish, these salmon, have come up the river to spawn. And then once they've done the spawning, they very much then die and provide food for the bears. And when the bears drag the salmon into the forest, that takes nitrogen and phosphorus and all those nutrients back into the forest and allows for this kind of flow of nutrients in this amazing life cycle that happens there. Here's a couple of those youngsters that we saw a little bit earlier, just coming along and learning very much from their mum, and mum looking for some of these dead fish. It's amazing how hard some of them are to grip and get hold of, and you're watching the youngsters often learning from their mum when they were in the river. And here's actually some of the salmon. You can just see it. Some of them were still very well. Some of them were still coming up the river to spawn. Some of them were half dead and some of them were very dead. And so you got to see the whole myriad, really, of different fishes, different salmon, really, in the river at different stages of their life cycle. And so there's mum and the cubs just relaxing. But again, you can see here that we're very much trying to be in the position where the animals are coming into their space and they're relaxed, and we're not changing their behavior in any way. And here's one of those bears looking right at us after having munched on some salmon. And finally, a couple of times throughout the day, actually, but particularly towards the end of the day, we got a wonderful views of one particular spirit bear called Boss. And these spirit bears are in this particular part of British Columbia. They've got some genes that give them this white hair rather than dark hair, and the kind of rusty color around the neck is where this bear, I think, has been probably rubbing against a tree. And this one has found some salmon. It was quite happily feeding on it, and throughout the time of the day there, we got particularly good views of this spirit bear. It was coming close. And you can see all these bears are looking quite tubby, really. They're obviously feeling very well at this time of the year. They're putting on lots of weight, lots of fat to be able to get them through the winter time. And these fish, of course, have got lots of nutrients and lots of fatty acids in their bodies for the bear to feed on. So you can just see the big paws, the big claws, and the wonderful character of this particular spirit bear. There it is looking back at us. And the final shot here, just showing you the landscape that we had from this hide. So these bears were just coming out from different directions, from the different vegetation and coming to feed. And the final shot really before we headed back to the boat and the next day sailed back into Kitimat was of the spirit bear there, just looking back at us in this wonderful wild environment of the Great Bear Rainforest. So I hope that you've enjoyed just a quick visit to the Great Bear Rainforest, and it's just shown you the wealth of wildlife that is there, the wealth of landscapes to see, and the fact that, you know, you just never know what you're going to see with regards to things like the orcas. So I shall finish off there.